listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. I gotta tell you something, people. I just started growing a handlebar mustache, and Joanne hates it. She looked at me the other night, she said, "You have to be joking." And I said, "Listen, we're in a pandemic. I'm not going out anywhere. I'm growing some damn facial hair." So, my guest today has great hair, but besides that, he's a legendary comedy writer. He's won multiple Emmys. He's also a songwriter, a playwright. He's worked with some of the top talent in the business, and I need to talk to him because he wrote on the Paul Lynn Halloween special. And my guest is the one, the only, Bruce Vilanch. How you doing, Bruce?
Hello, guilty of all those things. Guilty of committing television.
Exactly. You know, you've been in the business for so long. You know, when did you find your love for comedy? Was it as a kid? What were your influences?
Well, yeah, as a kid, you know, I made faces in the mirror like a lot of kids who go to comedy. I was happy when I was in another character in a fantasy world. Although my world was not terrible. It was just, you know, I was an unconventional kid. I was, fat. I was not athletic. So right away I was on the fringe of everything. So I developed a comic point of view. And I was heavily influenced by my mother, who was very funny, who came from a family of brilliant. In fact, her uncle was a Catskills comic. He was not a successful Catskills comic, but he was a Catskills comic. And so I grew up in a kind of an atmosphere of people making jokes. My father's family was very German and doer and scientific, and they were not funny. But my mother's family was a riot. And when I was a kid, I was drawn to the fat guys like Jackie Gleason and Zero Mostel and pardon me, you named those were the ones because they got to be funny and they got to be big stars. And I thought, well, that's good. As I got older, I collected more of them as influences. And then Sophie Tucker, who I saw as a kid, who was by the time I saw her was a fat girl. She was the last of the fat hot mamas.
So, at what point, I mean, you were watching these, at what point did you sit there and think that you could write jokes, or did you want to act, or what was that goal?
I wanted to act. I was a child actor. My parents enabled me. I was never a child star, or we'd be having this conversation in rehab. But I did commercials, and I did a lot of theater. I went to a summer camp that was like Fame in the Berkshires. It was run by Ted Mack, who was kind of like the Simon Cowell of his day. He ran the Ted Mack Amateur Hour, which was a big television show that turned Elvis down. That's his footnote. He turned Elvis down. But Anne Margaret was on the show. She lost to a woman who played Lady of Spain on the Leaf. You know.
It's so funny when you look back at some of these old shows, like some of the stuff people did. Like, as a kid, I would watch it and you go, "Wait a second, there's a guy blowing into jugs, and there's 5 of them, and they're playing tunes."
Well, there was the Swiss bell ringing act, where they would have 20 bells lined up, and they would do a song with all the bells. And then there was variation on that was water glasses, which people still do as a science project. Where you fill them at a certain level and you rub your hand over them and you get noises and you kind of get a music, but approximate music. Anyway, so I was not one of those that go that far, but I acted, and then it became clear to me that I wasn't going to get cast because I was too young for what I was. I looked older. I had a deep voice. I was big. And I was up against genuine people who were the right age. So I started writing about it, kind of as therapy for the high school paper, and became editor of that. And my parents said, "Oh, well, why don't you have writing journalism as a fallback? Because newspapers will never go out of style." What did they know? What did any of us know? We were young. We were naive. And so I had the writing, and I wound up pursuing the writing because I was getting a better response at the writing than I was at the acting. And so I always went back and forth. I was always acting and performing and always writing. And eventually, they many years later, it came to a head when I was on Hollywood Squares, and I was on TV 6 nights a week performing, more or less. And I began getting on Broadway and on the road. And I started doing my own, like, not a stand-up act, but like I call it a sit-down act, because I tell stories and stuff like that. So they eventually coalesced.
Now, when you were younger and writing, was comedy your definite go-to? And did you know when you wrote something if it was funny or not? Because some people do. Some people can write a joke and they go, that's going to work. And of course, I did stand-up for 8 years. I used to tour, and you'd see people and you'd say, how the hell did you even deliver that? Because just the components aren't funny. When did you start getting the feel that you knew something was funny?
Well, when I got a laugh. I mean, as a kid, if you did something and they laughed, you know, that's funny. As you get older and you begin constantly creating stuff, you say to yourself, if I think it's funny, maybe they'll think it's funny. Sometimes you're wrong. And a lot of times it's if you're writing for a specific thing, you're reading the room in advance. And I think after enough times at bat, you realize you can hit the ball. You realize, oh my God, I'm a player. That you know, I don't think there's any that drug. Except that's as hard and fast a rule as you can get. So, you know, a lot of people work in comedy and they never quite hit funny. A lot of performance artists who are conceptual don't hit funny a lot of the time, and that. And now it doesn't, you know, I mean, someone like Andy Kaufman, who I knew, who was a friend, and I never really worked with, but we did shows together, never really hit funny. I mean, it was brilliant, but it wasn't like, people weren't rolling on the floor with laughter, yucking. I mean, you were watching the whole concept of the thing. Some people don't like that at all, which is why he was perfect. He became big on Cheers, where he had to be funny. He had to get laughs. And so people would go to see him thinking not Cheers, Taxi. People would go to see him thinking he was going to be Latka, and Latka was going to be funny. And of course, he was doing some other characters. You know, sometimes he would just come out as one character, and that would be the show. Well, it wasn't Latka, and so they were not crazy about that. But it didn't matter, because once you've been on television, there's nothing bigger than being on television. And there's nothing sadder than somebody who was on television, like me, who was no longer there and who was like, you know, kind of become in the markdown section of comedy beer. But I'm a gay icon, so I don't care. I get laid.
Exactly. So you were in Chicago in your younger age. You know, you started breaking it in Chicago. Is that where you first started getting your big breaks in Chicago?
Well, when I got out of college, I got a job at the Chicago Tribune, and I was a feature writer, and I would interview all the stars who came to town on junkets promoting the movies and records and TV shows and stuff. And I was doing commercial and acting on the side. And there was a lot of work in Chicago, and I met Bette Midler, who was starting out. She had an act. She was on Broadway and Fiddler on the Roof as one of the daughters, and she would go to the Improv down the street, the theater. And he signed with Bud Friedman, who owned the Improv, and he got her a date at a club in Chicago, a very famous club called Mr. Kelly. There were a lot of very hip actors and performed and starred. And she came there as the opening act for Jackie Vernon, who was a deadpan comic. People don't remember him, but he was very funny because he was totally he never broke. And he would say things like, when I was a kid, I was unwanted. Now I'm wanted at 13 stage. And that was the tone of it. It got funnier. I mean, his act, he had some really funny stuff. Anyway, Bud called and said, would you write about her? If you like her. And I wrote about her. I liked her. I thought she was terrific, and I wrote about her. And she called me and said that was very funny. And I said, you're funny. You should talk more on stage. And she said, you got any lines? And I began writing jokes for her. Local material a lot, but she kind of had an act, but then I began writing more and more of it. And then went on the road with her, and that lasted 5 years, during which time she broke. You know, she was discovered at the Turkish baths, and then she got a record deal, and that broke her. And she had a dresser who had a brother named Tim Hauser, who had a group called the Manhattan Transfer, which was just starting. And so we put their act together, and she got them an album deal, and they got a television series. It was a short-lived TV series, a summer show, replacement show for Cher, that I was also writing for. And so I came out here to L.A., darkest Hollywood where I am now, and stayed. I was writing a variety television. There was a lot of that then. Cable killed it, but there was a lot of it then.
I used to love variety shows. As a kid I watched them, and what as a writer, what is when you're a writer on a variety show back then in the golden age of variety, for me at least, did you write everything from an opening monologue to a sketch, or what were your responsibilities as a writer?
Generally, yeah, everything. I mean, there was always a team on those shows. There was a head writer, and there were a team of writers, and some of those writers were teams themselves. There would be pair out. For example, on the Carol Burnett show, almost everybody was a team because the husband discovered he could get two for the price of one. And so he was not the most extravagant producer, and he was producing the show, and so he would only hire the team. But everything gets split up. There were people who will spend. It depends on who the talent is. If Carol didn't do a monologue, she was not a stand-up comic. But if you were writing, I wasn't too young, but the Jack Benny show, Jack Benny was a comic, and so he would always have a monologue that was talking, or any of the talk shows, Johnny Carson, et cetera, et cetera. So there were writers who just do that, and then there would be other writers who would just do sketches and things, and there were some who would just do musical stuff. I wrote Donnie and Marie, and we had a brilliant guy named Earl Brown who just wrote the finales because they were an extended medley. And then we'd come in and put like jokes and things in finale. Each finale had a theme, The Wizard of Oz or Star Wars or something like that. So there was a division of labor.
Now you mentioned,
and on the shows, I did a lot of shows with Paul Lynn was on, and I would write Paul's on Donnie Marie. I wrote.
Tell me about the Paul Lynn Halloween special, because if people don't know, Kiss was on it, Florence Henderson was on it. It's a spectacular show.
It is. It's amazing because it was one of many weird specials that were done in the day, and it came and went, and it was rediscovered on the internet. And the fact that it's a Halloween show, and there are so few Halloween things that don't involve slasher, and monsters, that and Hocus Pocus, which I also worked on, are two things that are perennials now. There is a new audience every 5 years for those shows, and because the kids grow into it. But that one, Paul had a very rich specials deal at ABC because he had a series that did not work, and they were paying him off in specials and Donnie and Marie and things like that. And I don't know who pitched the idea. It was not my idea, but to marry Paul with Halloween, and once anybody heard it, it was perfect,
Right.
And the promo was Paul in a witch's outfit, and it was just because, he was Uncle Arthur on Bewitched, but he was never a witch. He wasn't a warlock. He was in mufti all through Bewitched. Unless there may have been. I'm not a Bewitched freak, so if there's anybody out there who remembers episode 312 where he did put on a witch's outfit, forgive me. But so we immediately we had him as a family of famous witches. We had the Wicked Witch of the West, and we had Witchy Poo, and they both agreed. Margaret Hamilton came out from New York to do it, and Billy Hayes came from around the corner of the studio, where she was my neighbor, to do it. And then it was those network specials were typically cast a very wide net. It was like you have to get people who will appeal to kids and adults who buy Tylenol and different diverse ethnic groups. So everything was on it. So Florence Henderson was an ABC star, and that was called cross promotion. Put her on, but Tim Conway was funny. You needed somebody else besides Paul who would bring the funny, so he was on. And then Roz Kelly, who was Pinky Tuscadero on Happy Days, another ABC star, a cross-promotional thing. Kiss was obviously to appeal to the youngest demographic. And it was really very strange because Paul had no idea who Kiss was. And no idea. And I showed him the makeup, and he thought that was hilarious right away. And then he met Gene Simmons. And he took one look at Gene Simmons' tongue, and he said, "I want to know him better." and of course, I told Gene this, and he says, "It happens with everybody. That they see my tongue, they want to get next to me right away." And then he wound up he repeated that story, I think, he had a reality show for a while. Anyway, he's an old friend from that period. And also, the other shocking thing about this on the Fall and Halloween special was they brought their fan club president, and there was like a contest you could watch. Fan club president arrived, and his father was Ringo Starr. And the fact that Ringo was old enough to have a kid who was old enough to threw all of us into a panic because we suddenly felt very old. You know, Ringo has a kid. Ringo who's a kid who's an adult. But it was pretty fun. And Paul, of course, other than wanting Gene, had no idea what Kiss's music was like. He was kind of like, "What? What?" But he, and it just. There were some things on the show that were cut out. There was one sketch, which I worked on, that was too hip for the show. And it really harkens back, God. Barbara Walters had been made the first anchor of a network news show, the first female anchor of a network news show. And she co-anchored with a guy named Harry Reasoner, who was an old kind of alky kind of a journalist, crabby kind of. And they did not make for a happy marriage at all. And she, I believe, they created 2020 for her as a result of that, but they had a big contract with her. But we did a sketch about the two of them, having a fight on the air during the show. And Florence Henderson played Barbara, and I think Paul was Harry Reasoner. And it was very funny, but it was way too hip for the room. It was asking the audience at ABC, they didn't want it at all because they didn't want anybody to make fun of the fact that they had this flaming turd on TV every night at 6:30 that they didn't know what to do about it. So I wish I could find an outtake. The producer, one of the producers of the show is around. And I keep saying, please go into your vault and see if maybe you had, you just have a tape. Because, once it's an outtake, then the footage kind of disappears. It's literally cutting room floor. So we're trying. It's been 50 years, but we're trying.
That was a great show. And then you also, you've written, your writing is just all over the place, which is awesome. You also wrote in a Star Wars holiday special. Tell me about that, because it's just Paul, Lynn, and Star Wars. Holiday, Halloween. It doesn't get better than that.
Well, that was another crazy holiday special that networks were doing. And they may have been within a year of each other. But it was a different network. That one was CBS. And, which is why we had B. Arthur and Art Carney and other people who were active on CBS at the time. It was, I have to say, first, I have a couple of things I have to say whenever I talk about that show. First of all, it was, there were a lot of crazy variety specials happening. It was the 70s, and we were chemically altered. And, I say that, and then I saw somebody's review of the Lego, Star Wars Lego house, but said, of course, it's nothing like the first one that was written by Bruce Vilanch, who was coked out of his mind. Where they got that from, I don't know. But so I tried to sort that. We wasn't coked out of my mind. We did all the things people did in the 70s. I joked that Carrie Fisher and I snorted the Sweet and Low. But that's an exaggeration, obviously. But it's not saying anything out of school. Tell you that Carrie had it with doing some drugs. But so I say that because what that means is that we were oftentimes operating on a buzz, but at the same time, so was a lot of the audience. So there was a good marriage there. And the other thing I want to first of all I say that a lot of people this gets people angry. A lot of people at the time thought Star Wars was a piece of crap. Star Wars was a movie. It was a summer blockbuster. It borrowed a lot from the Old Republic serials. Some people thought it was a parody of the Old Republic serials. It had not become the Scientology of the nerds, which it became later. I mean, he was just about to start shooting Empire Strikes Back when we did this thing. He was preoccupied with that, as a matter of fact. But it became a religion after the first three movies were on video, and another generation began watching them and began worshiping. And then then the internet happened, and it perpetuated that myth, and it perpetuated suddenly our stroke came bubbling up out of the Paleozoic slime, and people could say, George, you betrayed us. How did that happen? And every time there's a new Star Wars thing, it comes up. If I had known 45 years ago that we were going to be talking about this, I would have paid closer attention. So those are the things I have to say. Now, also, George, of the 10 original Star Wars stories he told me he had, this was the last one he sold to CBS, and I think he thought, because I don't think George thought in terms of network variety specials. I think George thought it would be like an original musical thing. If he thought that, why he decided to sell them an idea that headlined the Wookiees, who are a species that speak no known language in this or any other universe, and who, as I always said, sound like fat people having orgasms. Trust me, I know. I don't think he would have sold them that had he known that what a network variety special is like. So he was kind of appalled when it began falling together. And he backed away into The Empire Strikes Back and left his subalterns to deal with it. And they didn't really have much to say about it. And the network was busy trying to create a big kind of holiday thing. So it became this weird amalgam of cheap special effects and a lot of people in monkey suits running around doing mime. And Wookiees can't even mime. They're big, clunky creatures. They're not mimes with little subtle, fingers that they can do things. No. They are the kind of things that you wide load, step out of the way. So it was kind of doomed, and we loaded it up with variety elements that some of it were good, some of it were ridiculous, and it came and it went exactly. And the internet suddenly it came bubbling up on the internet as a result.
It's funny when that stuff happens because I'll be honest, I saw the first 3 Star Wars. I didn't see the other ones. I haven't watched The Mandalorian, but it always amazes me how people, you think that someone was like hitting their kid, like how pissed they get when anyone says anything a little bit off about Star Wars. They become rabid, and it amazes me because I think it's a fucking TV show. I mean, a movie.
It's like Scientologists. You can't make fun of their religion. First of all, they think it's a religion, and and with Star Wars, you're making fun of their religion, and they think this is a religion too.
No, you're right.
I enjoy Star Wars. It's fun. I've gone to see everything, and I even watched the Lego special, which was strange because they made Daisy Ridley look like Rosie O'Donnell. I don't know how they managed to do that.
So you were writing these writing for variety specials. When did you start writing jokes? Because I'm sure that's what ended up getting you to the writing for the Oscars. But you wrote material for a lot of people. How did you break into that?
I guess on the performance level, it started with Bette. I was writing for Bette, and a lot of people came through town in Chicago, and I got some publicity for doing that, or they heard about it. And so I was writing stuff for Lily Tomlin and George Carlin and Richard Pryor and David Steinberg, not the manager, but the comedian and other musical acts that came from Bette. Barry Manilow was her music director, and Luther Vandross was her backup singer. Melissa Manchester was a harlot. So I was writing for all those people. And when I came out to Hollywood, it just expanded. I was writing a lot of what they call patter for people when they do their concert appearances. A lot of, for Vegas and stuff like that. And it was a natural transition to variety where people, tell jokes. Now, I was never. I would go into a club to see how certain things are working for people I was working with. When Robin would do a spot on the Oscars, we would go to the Comedy Store and he would try stuff out just to see how it felt. Billy would never do that. Billy Crystal would never do that because he didn't want to give any of it away before it was on the Oscars because he wanted it to be fresh. But and Whoopi, she didn't do that. But I was writing, like, she always had characters, but she also did. When in her live act, even right now, when there is a live act, she does stuff up front about current events and being on The View and all that. So I guess I sort of eased into it. I mean, I write a lot of much more for people who are presenting something than I do for fictional characters. Although I do that too, but screenwriters and playwrights create the characters and write them, and I'm presented with a persona that I have to write to, which makes it easier in many cases.
Now,
I admire people who invent the characters out of mobile.
How did you break into the Oscars? How did you get that first job? And you wrote for them for so long. How did that happen?
I'd written for a bunch of people off and on who were on the show, and then in 1989, Alan Carr was given the show to produce, and he brought me on to write it. And that was the infamous Snow White, Rob Lowe show, and which I didn't do. He imported the whole that opening number from San Francisco, from Beach Blanket Babylon, which was a big review up there, and added Hollywood touch. But and of course the show, it was kind of cataclysmic. But the next year they brought in a different producer who went on to do 17 more of them, and Billy Crystal came in as the host, and so for Billy. So I survived, and I wound up doing 23 shows as a writer or a head writer, and then a lot of other shows under the table writer for people who were not thrilled with their material, mainly because the show became hosted mostly by talk show hosts who were comedians, but who had 10 or 12 people on a writing staff, and they would bring them over to the Oscars. And they would write for them, but the rest of the show had to be written different, and there was no money left in the writing book. So there would be a writer, but they wound up, people who were on the show would wind up going to their friends and collaborators and say, fix it, fluff this up.
What were your responsibilities when you wrote on the Oscars? What is it like? When do you start? A week before? I mean, how is the whole process?
Yes, a week before. Just like, when do you start training for the Super Bowl? A week before. Yeah, that's right. I guess Tom Brady, about a week before yesterday, he was out for all of that. The show is usually February or March, and we start in October. Or whenever they nail down a host. And this year, of course, was unprecedented, as with everything. But it used to be we'd start in October and throw around some ideas, and once there was a host on board, we would throw around more ideas with what the host do, and then they used to have the honorary awards we presented on the show, and so we could write those because those would be decided on. However, they eliminated that. They made that a separate event called the Governor's Award, which they tape and then insert onto the Oscar show. So instead of being an extra hour on the show, it's an extra 3 minutes. So basically, everything is in place for the nominations. And once the nominations are announced, it's 6 weeks or maybe a month, depending on the scheduling, between the nominations and the show. And that's when everything really gets written. Because you know what you're writing about. You know what the movies are. You know who will show up. You know who will exercise the ritual taking of umbrage, and all of that. And so it gets intense until the show. And then during the show, I'm always in the wings, in a little cubicle that's set up for the host with with television sets and food and booze. And we watch the show as everybody else does. And as opportunities come along, we rewrite. But, you know, it has to be the right moment. It has to follow something. You don't want to have to call back to something that happened half an hour ago. So for me, when I'm doing it, the writing never doesn't stop until it's over.
Now, what were your responsibilities when you became head writer? Were you just overseeing everything, or what were your job then? Because
you're in charge. You're in charge. The show tends to bifurcate. That's a good word. Into the host and the rest of the show. And so the head writer is the liaison between the host and everybody else. All the team of writers the host brings in, and whoever is writing the rest of the team of writers, if there's enough money, who are doing the rest of the show. And it's basically the point person with the producer or producers, and if necessary, the Academy and the ever-present network censor.
Yeah.
Who is less present than she used to be. It's not she anymore, but it was she for many, many years. She used to be omnipresent, but now, you know, network television standards have relaxed a lot. You can't compete with cable and the internet unless they give the writers some slack.
Have you had any jokes that on the Oscars that you knew were golden, but then the censor's like, you can't say that? And what would you rewrite them then? Or, I mean, give me an example.
Oh, we would generally have to just there was the one year, if you remember, Hugh Grant got caught with a hooker, and her name was Divine Brown, but everybody knew that at the time. And Whoopi was hosting the show, and she was going to say, of course, the biggest release this year was Hugh Grant's, which we knew would be a huge laugh. And she said, yeah, that's Divine Brown. That's a real fellatio Alger story. And Mrs. Butterman, the network censor, said, oh, no, you can't do that. Fellatio is on the list. And she had a list of words that could not be said. Fellatio was one of them. And so we looked at each other and we said, we're not going to fight over this, you know. I mean, you're not going to fight over a blowjob joke. No. And then the saddest was Steve Martin, the first year, who we had a fabulous joke. He was going to come on after the monologue, come back after the commercial and say, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is my fly was open throughout the monologue. The good news is the camera puts on 10 pounds. And it's a great joke. And Steve said, oh, I can't do that. It's a cop joke. And I said, no, it's a camera joke. And I argued, and I brought in a nun, and I told her, she laughed. And Mrs. Futterman thought it was hysterical. And she said, fine, nothing wrong with it. It's a great joke. And at the last moment, just before he was going on, he turned to me and he said, I can't tell a cock joke. And of course, I couldn't argue with him. And I said to the stage manager, we're cutting the cock joke. And the stage manager said into the PA, the cock joke has been cut. The audience heard. You see Judi Dench going, cock joke? What was cock joke?
Now, as you said, you've written a lot and you've acted. What was it like with Hollywood Squares? Because all of a sudden, if you don't know what Bruce looks like, he always wears cool glasses. He's got great hair. You're not like someone, if you're out in a restaurant in LA, someone's like, that guy's somebody. But people wouldn't know who you were. What was it like once Hollywood Squares came on? Because people would see you every day. How did that change your life?
Well, first of all, Amy Schumer wrote about me in her book. She said, want to know, if you don't know who Bruce Vilanch is, she said, I look like Bruce Vilanch the morning after. I look like Bruce Vilanch. If you don't know what that looks like, a picture of Barn Owl with red glasses. So I've always shouted out to Amy for that. But a lot, when you're on television, a lot changes immediately because you are recognized, you are known. Now, I never had the kind of success where I couldn't leave the house. There were no mob scenes trying to have a clip of I wasn't Justin Bieber. It's not like that. That is a different level of fame. But I had the kind of level of fame, which I still have, where I'll go someplace and somebody will want a selfie with me. Or before selfies, there was autographs. And I'd be giving autographs to people, and other people would be walking by going, "Who's that?" Because that's the kind of fame, I had that kind of fame. People knew me, and other people had no idea who I was. Now with selfies, it doesn't happen because everybody does selfies with everybody. So nobody knows who anybody is. They just say, "Oh, there's some schmucks doing a selfie." But it's when you have the real kind of huge stardom thing that hits you like a bulldozer. No one's prepared for it, especially when they're young. When you're Miley Cyrus, you're somebody very, very young, and you get that rush of where everything you do is marketable, especially now on social media. It's terrifying. Even 30 years ago, when Roseanne came out of nowhere and suddenly was the biggest star on television, and they were digging up stories about, she gave away her baby, and all the stuff that was her private life suddenly became everybody's interest. And I just think you have to be a pretty strong person to be prepared for that kind of honesty. So it does materially change your life. Yeah. Fortunately, that's not the case for me. I became a name, which I had been any name because I had been on television and whatnot. But I became, I was on your face 5 days a week. So, but I wasn't like it wasn't that level of gigantitude to happen.
Now, when did you start wearing the different color glasses? When did the Bruce Vilanch look start? As a little as a little kid on the playground, you had the hair and the glasses and the shirts. When did it start?
I didn't have glasses yet. My father was an optometrist, so I always wore glasses. The minute I had to wear glasses, I wore glasses. I always ordered ridiculous frames for myself. He never understood who are these frames for. I was afraid to tell him I was ordering all these frames, but they knew who they were for. But so I always did that. But I couldn't. As I was on my own, I couldn't afford to. When I got on Squares, I did a thing about having lots of glasses, changing glasses. But that's because I was getting a lot of money for it, it was being subsidized. And when my prescription changed, I realized I had to take a second mortgage on the house to change all those prescriptions. So I settled on red. That was, and it's a good thing too, because Squares was just going off the air. So I settled on the red glasses, and that was that. The T-shirts happened because my mother was very OCD, and she always dressed me up, and it's very difficult to dress up a fat kid because none of those things are comfortable. Ties are not comfortable around your neck. Nothing is done in your size, particularly. You're a husky, you're somewhere, neither man nor boy. And so I was so happy to take all of that crap off just for a T-shirt. And when I moved to California and realized I could go anywhere in a T-shirt, I said, well, I'll never leave it. I used to have a layer. I used to wear a shirt open, so like an artist's smock effect with a T-shirt underneath. That was in Chicago, of course. It was chillier there. But when I moved out here, I could get rid of that. And it was the 70s. It was ironic T-shirt era. So everybody was wearing them. And, there were either the rock bands or funny phrases or stuff, but I just never grown out of it. And as long as I can keep up this look and not look like some strange old guy doing it, I will continue. But it's my own hair. It's my natural color, which of course has been enhanced a lot.
Now, you mentioned earlier about Hairspray. Tell me about that. Tell me about when you got to act on stage. How did that come about, and was it really very satisfying for you?
Yeah. Oh, it was the most. I'd do it again in a minute. I've always acted on stage. That's one thing I've always done continued doing. When I was on Squares, I got a lot of offers for various things. Georgia Hairspray, but they wanted to do a national tour, and they wanted to have a name if they could, because the girl is always unknown. But they wanted to have a name that would help box office. I was on television every night, so I went and auditioned. I had to go. I auditioned a couple of times, and they offered it to me. And I went out and I toured it for a year, and then after a year, I went to Broadway after Harvey left, Harvey Firestein, and stayed with it for a year. And I would have gone back, but they changed they were rolling back to make more money, rolling back salary. I was not in the mood for that. So I left. I figured, okay, I've done 2 years, but I had the best time doing it. It's a fabulous show. I mean, and unlike a lot of things, if you do 8 times a week, it can become drudgery. But with that show, the minute you hit the stage, you know the audience is there to have a party, have a good time, and it raises you up, even if you're like feeling lousy, and you do your show. And so I said at the time, I understand Vanessa Redgrave. If I had to do Medea every night and kill my children and drag the corpses around, I might not be as lighthearted. I might have a heavier meander.
Well, it's funny, it's so funny how the way the audience plays a part. Like me, when I lived in L.A., me and my wife went to see Priscilla, Queen of the Jungle, at Pantages. And
Queen of the Desert.
Queen of the Desert, yeah. And it was so fun. It was so.
You got your queens mixed up.
Yeah, I got my queen. It was so fun though, because the crowd was there. It wasn't the pretentious like, oh, we're here for theater, and it just adds to the show. And when that happens, as an actor, do you feel that energy pumping off the crowd when you're on?
Absolutely. And you know the show so well. You know the moments that will tell you that certain lines, bits of business stuff. And sometimes house lights go down and the audience begins. They came apart. Now it's on us. If we'll screw it up. They are here to have a good time. Sometimes, the Wednesday matinee, the lights would go down, and they would be like, no, they're not here. Those people, these people, they're here to see whatever, and they're going to be much more judgmental. And they can either say, "Oh, so I'm going to have to really work hard," or you can view it as a challenge.
You've won a bunch of Emmys. Explain the feeling when you won your first Emmy, and what do you do with your Emmys? Where are they now?
Well, I had 6 of them, and 2 of them I have in the house. They're like bookends on either end of a shelf. They have pride of place. And then the others I gave various people. My mother had one, my grandmother had one, my agent, my manager, and then my mother and my grandmother both passed. So those I gave to a business manager, I gave the other one to a publicist who I work with, and they have them, and they like to have them in their office. My business manager is green. We have Emmy, and it says people think, you do something on television? He's an accountant. No, my client. So it's like, I said, I'll start commissioning this in a minute if you don't keep it polished. But the first time you win, I lost a couple of times before I won. So I had the experience of I always tell the host at any award show I've ever done, is that there are 5 nominees in the category, and only one of them can win. And so 4 of them are sitting there. And as the evening wears on, the audience fills up with losers. And they're not in the best mood. They may not want to hear your jokes. They may be sitting there thinking, who can they fire when they leave here? Now they can fire them on a text while you're doing your stuff. They can sit there and fire. So it may be that they get to expunge that feeling while they're actually in the audience. But so I've been in the losing section, and then I think it was my 3rd nomination when I won, and there had been a hiatus of a few years before it was like I few. I won a few in the '70s, and I won a few again in the '90s. And but so I went. I remember going to the first one, thinking, "Well, this isn't going to happen." I mean, the first one where I won, it's not going to happen because I never win, and I won. And so it was kind of like, "Oh, well, all right." And it happened to be. I didn't get to speak. I only got to speak once. It was a team thing, and one person speak. And one year, the first year we were nominated for Billy Crystal Oscar was the Jack Palance show where we kept rewriting, and we didn't think Billy was on vacation with his kids in Hawaii, and he was also nominated for a host, but he knew he was going to lose to like Michael Jackson was in this category. We figured he'd never. And he didn't win, but we did win for writing. And so all the writers got to get up there, and we all got to say something because people who do the Emmy show are all friends and colleagues of ours. They weren't going to cut us off. So we each got to say something, so I got to say something. And after then, the subsequent ones, again, I was never the spokesman. And Billy won the following year for hosting.
You mentioned the Jack Palance. What is that like when you're a writer and you're sitting in the wings and you see comedy gold when you see Jack Palance doing a push-up and then, what goes through your mind? Did you just sit there going, this is callback heaven?
I don't know. What's it like when you're having sex with the homecoming queen? Like, oh my God, I scored. I can't believe I'm doing this. I absolutely can't believe I'm doing this. And that's what it's like. It's like, a huge orgasmic high. It's like, oh my God, what an opportunity. And that's when everybody gets excited and starts throwing ideas around and jokes around. And so, yeah, it functions well for the show too, because if it's a live show, which most of those are, they're live. They're seen at the same time everywhere. You get to the host gets to be the host of a party that's actually happening. The audience at home really feels like they're at something because they know that this is not a pre-tape, this is something unplanned has occurred. So it's great. It's everybody. I mean, we all kind of laugh, and if it works, it's like, oh my God, we seized that opportunity and it worked. So it's very fulfilling in a gratifying way.
Yeah. Now, earlier you said you're a gay icon. Now, when did this iconic stature come in place, and how have you seen the gay scene in LA change? Because I'm sure in the very beginning, Paul Lynn, when you look back, you knew Paul was gay, but people in the Midwest didn't want to think, oh my God, there's a gay man on TV. How has it changed for you as a writer who has been a gay man and is now an icon? How's the progression been for you?
Well, it's two different things. Being a gay icon is something that's only really known by gay people. I mean, gay people have to be told that so-and-so is a gay icon. They don't know, unless it's Judy Garland. Then they have a hint. But that just happened. I think that's like longevity, and because I've been out forever, and because it's easier. I mean, because I'm kind of ubiquitous in the gay world, so and now I'm an elder statesperson. So, but it only it's like Confederate money. You can't spend it north of Virginia.
Right.
As for the other thing, being out in Hollywood, obviously, when I came, it was a whole different thing. But it never occurred to me to be anything but out. It wasn't something you declared like back. It was slowly after Stonewall, there was a movement. I felt I had never really been in, so I didn't have to. And I never felt like I was missing out on anything, because if I didn't get a job because somebody didn't like that I was gay, that was not a job I would have wanted to have. That was not somebody I would have wanted to work with. So it was it didn't change. Of course, now look, everything is different because as I've it was 40 years from Stonewall to Obergefell, to same-sex marriage equality at the Supreme Court. And once that happens, kind of made gay people first-class citizens. And so that there was a certain mission accomplished. That, the right wing. The only thing left is religious bigotry. Religious bigotry is something that doesn't go away. It hasn't gone away in 2,000 years. So it ain't going away, all that fast. And that's the only hurdle we still have. There are still religious bigots. And they make noise and they want to take rights away. So, and it's easier in Hollywood now to just be who you are, to be your authentic self. What hasn't happened yet is an out gay actor being a big action hero star, which would be, when football and basketball and baseball and all of those things have big out stars who are not just famous for being out, but who are genuine stars, then that begins to change the culture generally. And that's the longer haul,
Now, for you, living in LA, being a man about town, how have you been dealing with coronavirus? I mean, how are you dealing with the pandemic? Are you someone who stays in all the time, or have you tried to venture out?
I mean, because I'm of a certain age, so I'm getting a vaccine Wednesday. I'm getting a shot Wednesday, so that things will begin to change after that. But up until now, I've worn pants 5 times since March 12th, once with a belt. And, I'm a writer. I'm very lucky. I can work. I can sit here going commando. And unless I stand up to answer the door for the Amazon guy and pull a Jeffrey Toobin, I'm okay. But I'm very lucky. I mean, people who have to be out on the front line and people who have to go out into the world as part of their daily business, and I don't have to do that. I miss performing live because that just doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, I'm in LA County. I mean, today California is opening up outdoor dining again and lifting the stay-at-home order, but it's county by county, and I doubt that LA County will lift the order today because the numbers here are still very high. So, and we've all developed very rich lives on Zoom. Who knew what Zoom was a year ago? Now Zoom is the biggest app in the world now.
I always wonder, it's funny, people had Skype, and then Skype just disappeared, and now everybody has Zoom, and I'm thinking, what happened to Skype?
Skype, I always got lousy imagery on Skype. I never had a good image on Skype. I think people were happy to get rid of Skype. I have Skype, and sometimes say, Skype, I'll say, if you must, but it'll look better on Zoom, trust me. It just will, and there you go. But it's, where's MySpace? Where's Friendster?
It's so funny how things change. You sit there, and it's just, I mean...
The only people who remember those things are people who were teenage girls when they were around.
Right. Before we go, I got to ask you, what are you working on right now, and what is the future? What would you like to see the future of Bruce Vilanch be?
Zac Efron. He's living in Australia, and he's got a woman, so I don't think I'm going to get much fertility there. Other than that, I can't plug anything. I mean, I wrote a musical. I've been writing stuff, during the thing, but I got nothing to plug. I'm doing a million benefits, but that benefits are us. So I wish I could tell you. I am working on a book, which is about all these how I committed the worst television shows in history and lived to tell the tale, and some of which you've heard today, but that won't be out for a while. I'm hoping it will be done. We can rush it out next Christmas, but who knows? Who knows?
Well, I want to thank you, Bruce. It's so funny. Steve Joyner, I'm friends with him on Facebook, and he followed my Cooper Talk radio page, and he sent me a message, and he said, I know a lot of people, and we were talking on the phone, and he mentioned your name, and I said, I got to have Bruce Vilanch, because, you're a comedy writing legend. So, no.
Hubba.
Are you on Twitter? Do you tweet a lot?
I twat not. I am on Facebook, I mean, I have a Twitter account, but I never use it. I'm on Facebook, and that's good enough for the moment. And you can always. There's a fan site called WeGotBruce.com. With a guy in Nashville. Now he's Panama City, Florida, who like knows more about what I'm doing than I do. And like he'll plug this thing, and he'll like I send him all this stuff, and he's all over me. So if you need to get a hold of me, go to WeGotBruce.com.
Well, I want to thank you, Bruce. People, go check out Bruce. Just, go find his work, watch him. Go, if you can find the old Hollywood Squares, check it out. He's very funny. So follow him. Go to getbruce.com, wegotbruce.com. Go to my website, coopertalk.net. I have over 830 episodes. Email me, cooper@coopertalk.net. Twitter is @coopertalk. Instagram, coopertalk1. I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you guys next time.